it reminds me, I think, of something that we have also, yes, this point we touched in the beginning, that a moral rule or any kind of proposition which undermines a basis on which it rests cannot be true. So it's like this idea, for example, if you say every statement is false, well, is this statement itself false? Yes, it would have to be, but then it would not be true. And so it cannot be that every statement is false. And this kind of logical trick can be applied to many self-defeating propositions, or can demascate many self-defeating propositions.
Right, and another example might be the idea that it is immoral to make moral decisions. Well, in order to actually relate to that statement, you have to make a decision about morality. So that's another example. Yeah.
Yes, I like that. Yes, I like that. So, and yeah, and so now these are quite these are like straightforward to realize, but as we talked after our last conversation, I think that the same thing can be said, for example, of this antinatalist moral dictum that you should act in a way to end the existence of life or of human life. Because as soon as I ask, is this an absolute moral truth? Yes. But then this absolute moral truth undermines the basis of its own existence, which is that there are human beings, because without human beings, there are no moral dictums. And so it cannot be absolutely true because it destroys itself and then it no longer is. So I'm not making it very clear, but I think better than last time.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, and you can therefore say that it is impossible for it to be in accordance with our nature. In other words, to be natural for us to destroy all human nature. So yes, if that makes sense.
It's, I think, another way of formulating something very similar. What you have now just said, it's also the same principle. It cannot be in accordance with human nature to make humans no longer existing, because that seems like a contradiction. I was just now reminded there are these funny machines. I think they are called stupid machines on YouTube, where you can push a button, or you can the machine is like a closed box, and then you can open like a lever, and then the box goes up and an arm comes out and closes the lever again, and then the box closes again. So the only purpose of the machine is to undo itself, basically. As soon as you start it, the machine puts out an arm and turns itself off again. And this is kind of, it's funny because I think it captures this thing we have been talking about, that it's kind of senseless to have something which defies itself.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's a good point. So yes, it becomes impossible for it to be correct to thus get rid of humanity, because humanity is presupposed in our quest for morality. So yes, it would be, I would say, an indirect contradiction to say it's good to destroy humanity, because you could say, well, it's not a direct contradiction in the statement, like to say that X is not X, but it's still a contradiction when you consider more deeply about what is necessary for morality, like the existence of humanity, in a sense.
Yes, exactly. I think that's exactly the point, because certain concepts presuppose a lot of things. Like if you say something is moral and therefore you should do it, that presupposes morality. and that presupposes human beings who strive towards being good human beings, or who have therefore a certain nature. And so many things are presupposed, and therefore if you just look at the statement itself, then the contradiction is not obvious, but it's implicitly still there in the basis upon which this statement even rests. Yes.
Right. Could you sort of draw an analogy with the hypothetical idea that it is good to use the faculty of communication, communicating with others, in order to get rid of all communication? Yeah.
Yes, that's interesting. Yes, or some people, yes, some people, I will come back to your question, but a more simple form of the same contradiction is don't communicate. I mean, right. Okay, or don't listen. Don't listen to what I'm saying. This is not possible.
Right. There is no such thing as a language.
Yes, yes, exactly. Or there is no such thing as a sentence which can be understood or has some meaning.
Right.
all of these things, they are kind of self-contradictory, or sometimes there is also this idea of how do you call it? A performative contradiction. So this goes also a little bit into that, but I think the performative contradiction actually is the same as what we have said earlier, that in even the act of doing something, or in the concept that you are using in this statement, presupposes certain things which then contradict this statement.
Right. Yes. And thus the whole thing is self-defeating.
Yes, exactly. And therefore, in the end, you can just say this proposition is false. It cannot be true, because if it were true, then there is a contradiction. Therefore, it is false.
Right. So even though you could say that the issue about Antinatalism is more indirect, it is still true that it is self-defeating.
Yes. And therefore, you can say with certainty that it is not true. It's not correct. That's cool. That's really cool. And so could you state your question again? Using communication to end communication?
Yes, because of the faculty of speaking with one another. We must use that in order to end all forms of speaking, because it is immoral to speak. Yeah, that would be even worse. To say it's immoral to speak, so we need to speak. But at least the idea that it's a moral ideal to end all communication. So we must use communication to reach that end. That is another example, I would say.
Yes, I mean, if you go to a person and you say it is immoral to communicate, then this is also such an example of a performative or internal, though indirect or not obvious contradiction. But if it is immoral to communicate, then you cannot communicate this fact to others.
Right, yes.
Or you can, but then it would be immoral to do so.
Yes.
And this would also defy, again, the purpose of morality, which is doing that which is good and not doing that which is bad.
Right, exactly.
I think there is also a big origin of these indirect or not exactly obvious contradictions, that everybody understands that if you say something is moral, this means what you are saying is every person should do this and every person should not do the opposite of it.
Yeah, so this is implied in acting in certain ways to others, you would say.
Yes, or in saying that something is moral or not. So if you say it is immoral to communicate, then what you are basically saying is you should not communicate, but at the same time you are doing it. so you are doing that which you are saying you should not do, and then you are kind of defeating your own statement. Because yes, you would presuppose, yes, that's your point. You would presuppose that it is good if I make you aware of this fact that it's immoral to communicate. And then there is the contradiction, because then it would be good for me to tell you, but at the same time, it would be bad for me to tell you.
Right. It's immoral for you to listen to me right now. That's
yes, yes.
It becomes hypocrisy on a new level.
Yeah, so which is something, because people are already quite hypocritical enough oftentimes. So yes, this is very interesting. This inbuilt contradictions.
Yes, a hypocrite on steroids.
yes, if you so want. Yes,
right.
That's great. And so yes, it would be like, I think the way I understood your question the first time was, for example, if somebody uses his laptop or the internet to protest against people communicating or using the internet, that would also be in the same kind of performative contradiction.
Could you repeat the scenario? I didn't quite follow.
Yes, if someone uses his laptop or the internet to say that people shouldn't, either that they shouldn't communicate at all, or just that they shouldn't communicate over the internet, or that they shouldn't use laptops.
Right.
It's like these green, like these ecological activists that fly in a plane and text on their cell phone that modern technology is bad because it destroys the environment. There is some problem there.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, I sort of, I'm not sure if you all think the same, but I can imagine someone, let's say he's an activist who wants to get rid of social media, and he presents arguments why we should get rid of social media. And some of these arguments are promoted on social media. I mean, some could say that, well, it is understandable because ideally he wants to get rid of all social media, but as of right now, we simply have to do it as a necessary evil in a sense. So yeah, I have to think more about that, but yeah, what do you think?
Yes, I think it's a good point that you mentioned here, and I would have to think more about it myself, because these people would then object and say, yes, my end goal is that nobody uses social media, but for the time being, where it is so widely used, then I have to use it as a means to achieving this end. And the end is then that the means itself no longer exists.
Right.
It's like, what could you say? If you use an evil to fight another evil, or if you use something, I don't know, that you don't, for example, I have something that I don't want, I no longer want, I want it to be gone. And so I put it in a condition that it destroys itself.
Right. Yes, I suppose if a person qualifies his idea and says that it is not intrinsically evil to use social media, but ideally it would be better if we didn't have it, then he could be excused. But if he said that it is intrinsically bad as such to use social media, then he would have a problem using it.
Yes, very good. So he cannot say it is immoral to use social media, but he can say, for example, it would be better for your happiness or for your achievement of your goals, or even for your, oh, that's difficult now. It would be better for you to reach your actualization of human nature if you didn't use social media. That's
right.
difficult.
Yes, because it's not saying that it is immoral as such in itself to use it, but it is a moral choice not to use it in consideration of different factors.
Yes. Yes, because of course, if you have the right to do something, it still doesn't mean that you should do it. It might be better for you not to do it in consideration of some other factor. But still, I think it's difficult if you argue that you would have a better life if you didn't use social media. Isn't it then the same? Because we said the purpose of morality is to lead towards the good life or lead towards the fulfillment of your nature.
Right.
So in a sense, it would then be immoral to use social media if it keeps you away from achieving your human nature.
Right. Yes, that's a good point. And I was also just thinking that if a person said that it is always immoral to use social media, even if in consideration for other things, but if in every scenario it will always be moral, then that would also be problematic. So he would just have to say that it is generally a bad thing to do, but provided certain circumstances, it can be legitimate.
Yes, I mean, this makes then the whole question that we have been talking about even more complex if you start to define different scenarios or circumstances, which in real life you often have to do. Then it becomes even more difficult. So perhaps for now, I would only feel comfortable using this argument for very general global statements, which seem to be self-defeating or self-contradictory. Like it's immoral to communicate, or it's immoral to have children, or it's immoral to speak the truth, or something like that.
Right, as a general statement, because if they qualify and say that ideally, provided it is practically feasible and achievable and doesn't go against this and that, then it is morally good to do that, then it's another issue. But if it's as a general thing that it is immoral, generally speaking, then as you point out, you have a problem.
Yes. Wow, interesting. This was like a crazy little third conversation that we had here, but I think it's very cool. I will put it on YouTube perhaps as a crazy, I don't know, I will find some funny title, but I think it's really valuable because I think this is a problem that many people have. They say things which are self-defeating.
Yeah.
Many ideologies especially have this problem.
Right. People also saying that there is no such thing as objective morality. It's not as direct, but you still can understand that, well, they assume in the act of saying that it is moral to say it.
Yes, and that it is objectively moral to say things that are true, for example.
Right. Yes, that's true. I'm reminded of a skeptic who said that we cannot know anything at all, and that is what he said. And of course, we responded, well, do you know that you cannot know anything? And yes, that he ended up sort of saying that, well, yes, I am sort of assuming knowledge when I speak, but that's sort of just pretending, in a sense that when I debate you, I pretend I'm not a skeptic, but in actual reality, I'm a skeptic. But yeah, it's still absurd because to sort of do something that is against your belief, even if you say it is pretending, it doesn't make sense, if you see what I mean.
Yes, especially when you're talking about fundamental metaphysical beliefs. Yeah. Then it makes, yes, I agree, it makes no sense. And so then, but I think at this point, most of the bystanders would be convinced that the other person's position is not worth maintaining.
Right, it becomes absurd in itself. So yes, right.
Yes, and I think even if he might hold on to this absurd position for a certain time, I don't think it's very probable that a human being would hold on to an absurd position for his entire life. Because at some point, the absurdity will just keep gnawing at you until you eventually let it go and start holding some different position.
That's a good point. I haven't thought about that. I would sort of say that skeptics are not really skeptics because they actually do believe something to be certain knowledge. They are just not honest with themselves, you could say, because it's impossible to not hold something to be certainly true. But yeah, perhaps it's true that even after a certain time, they will themselves profess to another position as well.
Yes, I guess either, yes, but your point is also very well put, that they are just not honest with themselves. And I think you can remain in the state of not being honest with yourself for very long. So perhaps that's the problem, why they can remain skeptics in that sense. But yes, because this is very, very true, that it's just perhaps also a form of escaping responsibility or escaping truth or escaping some realization that is perhaps uncomfortable in the present moment, and therefore you're just not honest with yourself. Because of course the skeptic eats bread every morning or muesli or something. He doesn't think, oh, I don't know if this bread is poisonous or not, so I don't know what to do. Perhaps I will try and eat my laptop because I think I don't know what I should do. I mean, you can't live like that.
Right.
So again, if you look at his life, he acts very goal-oriented and according to certain knowledge which he has gained through his life. But then he says that this is not possible. So to me, it makes no sense.
Right. Every sensation he experiences, he knows that he experiences them. Every thought he thinks, he knows the thoughts because he thinks them. And even if you could say, well, he could say that, well, how do you know if you're not living in the matrix or some simulation? Well, you still know for certain that you experience a world around you with other people that you can't really escape the idea that you are actually believing, that you are living in a world, that you are experiencing things, that you are thinking things, etc. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this was interesting. This was cool.
Yes, great. Many good and important philosophical considerations to think about, and a way of criticizing antinatalism. Now, one thing about antinatalism, now, most of them will probably not say that it is intrinsically evil for a human being to exist, at least, or not be consistent with it, because then they would have to say that everyone has the duty to commit suicide. But since they believe that it is immoral to produce children, they would still, in a sense, say that human existence is bad because of the capacity for suffering. But yes, as we have talked about, that is self-defeating, because morality is about doing something good with your human existence. It presupposes human existence doing something good about itself, in a sense.
Yes, and I also think that they are, in a sense, yes, it's just the whole thing is somehow contradictory in itself, and it's difficult perhaps you can kind of shift the contradiction a little bit from one side to the other, but you can't get rid of it. It's like this game. There is this card game. I don't know if you know this in Norway too. In Switzerland, it's called the Black Peter. And so there are a lot of cards, and one of them is the Black Peter. And you always have to try to give this card to someone else, but you can't get rid of it. You can only give it to someone else. And then if the game ends, the person who has this card, he lost this round.
Right. Yeah, I think I remember something like that. That sounds a bit familiar.
Yes, and so it's like it's like many bad philosophies or ideologies, they kind of play Black Peter with their contradiction. So they kind of, whenever you talk to them about one part of their ideology, they put the contradiction in the other part, and then they say, no, here everything is clear, and then vice versa, but still the contradiction is somewhere. Because yes, as you said, if suffering is bad, then it would be the best thing to kill everybody right now in this instant. But then the antinatalists don't really say that, but then they say, yes, well, suffering is bad, therefore you shouldn't produce new children. But then what if I suffer because I'm not allowed to have children and I wish to do so? And so on and so on. And so you can just keep chasing it around. And also this problem that the whole notion of morality presupposes many things. Somewhere there is a flaw, and it might be hard to pin it down exactly, but it still has this contradiction somewhere.
Right, exactly. They seem to qualify it that it's not about human existence itself, but rather that you should respect potential children's right not to exist and not to experience suffering. But that doesn't make sense either. And according, still, they would say that that is the justification for it being bad for human beings to bring new human beings into existence. And that would still be wrong, because it would still make a problem of human existence as such, you could say.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say. I think you said it better. The antinatalist philosophy still makes a problem of human existence. Now, they are not doing it absolutely, in the sense that they say all human existence at all time is bad and should be terminated, the faster the better. But still, fundamentally, they say human existence is a problem and it shouldn't be. And yes, so that goes against the purpose of morality, as we said. And the other thing also is, it doesn't make sense to say, according to our definition, to have a right not to exist. Because as we have defined it, a right is, so for example, if I have the right to do something, that means I have the moral shield to act as I please in a certain prescribed area of behavior.
Yes.
First of all, this presupposes existence, and not existing is not an action that I can do or not do as I please.
Right. Exactly. Rights presuppose being, your human existence being there.
Yes.
And also another thing, an antinatalist would have to say, I should have never been born, or my parents should never have brought me into existence. But that also becomes absurd, because, well, you do exist, and you say you think it's good for you to be here and say that you should never been born. And also, the whole point of your morality is about promoting your being and existence. So yeah, I hope you get what I mean.
Yes, no, this is a great point. I was kind of feeling that, but I couldn't formulate it so far. But it's exactly true that the statement of an antinatalist saying it would be better that now I have to be careful that I formulate it correctly, but I should have never been born, or it would be better if I had never existed, then, I mean, this statement so far is okay, perhaps, but as soon as you imply a certain moral principle with this statement, then it becomes problematic. Because as we have said, morality presupposes that it's good to do these things which are moral, and it's bad to do these things which are immoral. And one part of it is that it's good to speak the truth about what is moral. And so this person standing there and basically saying, it's immoral for you to have brought me into existence. At the same time, he is presupposing that it's actually a good thing that he is saying this, because it's good to speak true moral statements.
Right.
But he couldn't speak it if he were not here. So, yes.
Right. He couldn't work for the sake of the antinatalist ideal if he were never born. So, yes, I suppose you could say that there is a problem there as well. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I really think this is this thing I was trying to get at, that a moral statement which undermines the basis of itself cannot be true. So the antinatalist who says it's a good thing that I am an antinatalist and working towards the goal of antinatalism, it's self-contradictory.
Right, because he presupposes that his human existence is a good thing.
And at the same time, it shouldn't exist, so it's a bad thing.
Right, yes, because it should rather be this ideal of no one existing.
Yes.
According to him, yeah.
Yes. Could you though, because we said this thing that something is a tool. So, but this would presuppose that, as we said earlier in our conversation, that you would not make an absolute moral statement, but you would qualify it. So you would say, for example, human beings shouldn't exist under these and those circumstances, but not generally. So could the antinatalist kind of say, well, I am using my life now that it's here basically as a tool to reach this good end. And so in that sense, it is still good to exist as long as you work towards the end of not existing, but this doesn't make sense somehow.
Right, yeah, if they qualify it and say that under certain circumstances, humanity shouldn't exist, but as long as humanity does exist, it is good to exist in order to bring about its end. I suppose you don't see this, I'm not sure, because as you said, there is a problem there as well, it seems, but they can, at least the qualification means that we don't see the same contradiction, I suppose.
Yes. Yes, I think the contradiction, it would not be the same contradiction then, as you said. It would, the problem seems more that that it's even more than fundamental. It's something like a thing cannot really exist for the sake of stopping its own existence. It's kind of a teleological problem.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's very true. Now I can imagine one type of approach an antinatalist could say is that no, that he doesn't really care about there not being any human beings. That's not his issue. His issue is rather respecting the right of potential children not to exist. But as you pointed out, that is also problematic because you can't have a right not to exist. So even if he tries that approach and said that no, my focus is not about the end of humanity, it's simply about respecting a certain potential right. Okay, then he avoids that problem, but he reaches another problem, which is the problem that you cannot have the right not to exist.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of exactly this Black Peter problem, that you're shifting the problem around, but you're never really getting rid of it.
Right,
yes,
right.
And I think it's something, for example, if let's say I have a car and I want to get rid of this car. And so I drive the car over a cliff. Then you could say, well, this is a contradiction because you are using the car to get rid of the car. So, but it's not the same thing, because I am a human being and the car is a car. But it cannot be the end of the car to get rid of, to stop its own existence. So it cannot be the end of a human being to stop his own existence, but it can be my goal to get rid of my car. And I might even use the car as a means to get rid of the car.
Right. The car is not a moral subject or moral good in itself. It's simply a material object. So, yes, exactly. So, yes, to use something to destroy itself that can work as long as that which is not destroyed, that which is destroyed is not a moral subject with moral goods that he can promote.
Yes, and also it is then an object of my action. But if I use myself to destroy myself, then I am both the subject and the object.
Right, yes.
And then I have to go against the purpose of, or the aim or the teleos of my existence or my being, because the end of something cannot be to destroy itself, else it wouldn't even exist in the first place.
Right, exactly. So you could say that for material objects that are inanimate, it would still be bad for them to destroy themselves, but not in a moral sense, because they have no free will. They are not moral creatures. They're simply material creatures, inanimate. So it will only be bad in the neutral sense, in the non-moral sense.
Yes, but you are right, because we said a good knife is a knife that cuts well. You cannot say a good knife is a knife which stops, which kind of eliminates itself as soon as it exists. Such a concept doesn't make sense. There is no such thing which is good when it immediately stops its own existence as soon as it exists. Well, then it doesn't exist, then there is no such thing.
Right. Yes. And of course, in our body, we have our heart. The end of that heart is to pump blood. So a good heart would be a heart that does it in a good manner, that actually pumps blood healthily. And a bad heart would do the opposite. And yes. So yes, those are objective facts about things being good or bad according to the nature. A good tree, apple tree, produces fruit. A bad apple tree has bad roots and does not produce fruits, or at least bad fruits. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it's interesting. Perhaps a topic for another conversation at some other time is this idea of anthropocentricity. So some people would criticize our way of talking about these things and say this idea of a purpose or an end is it's an anthropocentric idea. So it's only from the point of view of a human being. A good apple tree produces fruits. Why? Because the human being wants to eat the apple. But in an objective material sense, there is no such thing as a good or bad anything. There is just stuff, and that's the end.
Yes, that seems to be a common critique against teleology, that there are simply human concepts or construct imposed on reality. It goes back to this general epistemology of Immanuel Kant and others, that reality is only intelligible in the sense that we impose concepts on it, instead of concepts or realities being out there. We simply impose things, including teleology, and that is false. And we can go into that in a conversation one day, because that would be interesting.
Yes, I wrote it down on my list, because that is really, I think that would be very valuable to go into that. And I'm also curious, because I'm not aware of the arguments against it, even though I somehow feel that it's problematic, but we should go into that someday.
Yes, that would be interesting.
So great. Yes. This was a cool, lots of cool conversations that we had today. It was very, very valuable. I think there will be some good videos out of this, and it was fun too. So
yes, that was it. Productive. We covered many subjects. Very interesting. By the way, you're still recording in case you haven't noticed.
yes, that's true. But I think now